Tuesday morning at First National. Tuesday morning at First National Bank dawned with the quiet predictability of a sunrise sunlight, filtered through the grime-streaked windows, cast long, pale rectangles across the worn linoleum floor. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon-scented disinfectant, a scent Sarah Jenkins associated with quiet desperation and the gnawing fear of overdue bills. Sarah, perched on her high stool behind teller window number 3, plastered a practiced smile on her face as Mrs. Henderson, woman whose floral dresses always seemed a size too big, approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. How are we today?" "Oh, dear," Mrs. Henderson chirped, her voice as bright as her flowered ensemble. "Just drawing out a little for the church bazaar. Young Timmy's got a prize-winning zucchini this year. You wouldn't believe it." Sarah dutifully admired the photographic evidence of the prodigious zucchini on Mrs. Henderson's phone, all the while calculating how many hours she'd have to work this week to cover the electric bill. The daycare costs were crippling, and the landlord had been making veiled threats about market adjustments to the rent. Still, she couldn't let her worries show she needed this job. More than that, her daughter, Lily, needed her to have this job. Across the lobby, Mr. Peterson, a man whose ties always clashed spectacularly with his shirts, was engaged in a hushed, conspiratorial conversation with Mr. Abernathy, the bank's loan officer. The topic, as always, was golf. The rhythmic clack of keys from Brenda, the head teller, echoed from her corner office, a counterpoint to the low hum of the fluorescent lights. Outside, the city was beginning to stir. Buses rumbled down Main Street, their brakes hissing like disgruntled dragons, and the distant sirens wailed a mournful tune. The normalcy shattered with the force of a thunderclap. The double doors burst inward, propelled by a figure Sarah initially mistook for a Halloween costume. The figure, clad in a black ski mask and wielding a pistol that looked far too real, screamed, "Everybody down! This is a robbery!" 2 more figures followed, equally menacing, equally masked. Point one, built like a refrigerator, brandished a sawn-off shotgun, while the other, wiry and twitchy, held a duffel bag open, its emptiness a silent threat. The refrigerator, Sarah realized with a sickening lurch, was Bruiser. She remembered the menacing way he had looked at her in the diner, like she was an ant he might squash beneath his heel. The wiry one must be Glitch. His jerky movements and wild eyes gave him an unsettling energy that left the leader, Viper, barking orders in a voice distorted by some kind of modulator. "On the ground. Now. And no funny business." Viper's voice was a rasping snarl, amplified and distorted by the device. He swept the room with the pistol. His eyes, visible through the mask's slits, cold and predatory. Chaos erupted. Mrs. Henderson shrieked, dropping her phone and her prize-winning zucchini picture. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Abernathy dove behind their desks. Their golf dreams momentarily forgotten, Brenda scrambled to lock her office door, but Viper was too quick. He kicked it open with a deafening crash, sending Brenda sprawling. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had suddenly descended. Her hands trembled as she slowly lowered herself to the floor behind the teller counter, her mind racing. She had to think, had to do something. Lily needed her. Viper vaulted over the counter with surprising agility, landing with a thud that shook the floor. "You!" he snarled at Sarah, pointing the pistol directly at her face. "Open the drawers. All of them. And don't try anything stupid." Sarah met his gaze, her fear warring with a surge of defiance. She could smell the metallic tang of gunpowder and unwashed skin emanating from him. "Please," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's not much in them. Just, please don't hurt anyone. Open them." Viper roared, slamming his fist on the counter. The force of the blow sent a stack of deposit slips fluttering to the floor. Sarah's eyes darted to the silent alarm button, discreetly positioned beneath the counter. IT was her only chance. While Viper was distracted by his own rage, she could reach IT was a slim chance, but it was all she had. With trembling hands, She began opening the drawers, one by one, revealing the stacks of bills and rolls of coins within. As she moved, she subtly shifted her weight, inching her hand closer to the alarm. Faster! Viper snarled, shoving the duffel bag towards her. Fill it up. Now. Sarah forced herself to breathe, to remain calm. One wrong move, one sign of hesitation, and he might shoot. She grabbed handfuls of cash, stuffing them into the bag, her movements deliberate, careful. All the while, her fingers crept closer, closer. Bruiser was busy herding the other customers into a corner, his shotgun a constant, looming presence. Glitch, meanwhile, was ransacking Brenda's office, tossing files and papers into the air like confetti. The scene was a grotesque parody of a ticker tape parade. Finally, her fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the alarm button. It was now or never. With a surge of adrenaline, she pressed down, holding it firmly for the required 3 seconds. A tiny click was the only sound. A silent signal sent out into the city. She released the button and continued filling the bag, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She met Viper's gaze again. Forcing a look of fear and compliance, he seemed satisfied, his eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. "That's enough," he said, grabbing the bag. "Now, everyone into the vault." Sarah's silent prayer was that someone had heard the alarm. The net tightens. The siren's shriek, barely audible at first, swelled into a cacophonous blare. Sarah's pulse throbbed in her ears, an erratic counterpoint to the escalating symphony of dread. Beyond the bank's expansive windows, a phalanx of patrol cars descended, a black and white armada answering the call. The authorities were on scene. Viper spat a curse, a guttural rasp that cut through the strained quiet. He whirled on Bruiser, still wrestling with the vault's recalcitrant mechanism. "Forget it. We're cornered." Bruiser, his scalp gleaming with perspiration, slammed a beefy fist against the impenetrable steel. "Blast it!" Outside, Captain Robert Miller's expression was etched with concern as he assessed the situation. The First National Bank, usually a beacon of commonplace commerce, had become ground zero for a potential tragedy. He drew a long breath, fighting the familiar tide of anxiety. He'd navigated more perilous scenarios. Yet the weight of imperiled lives never lessened. He raised his megaphone. "This is Captain Miller, Metro City PD. The building is surrounded. Release the hostages and surrender peacefully." Viper's laugh was a jagged, unsettling sound that made Sarah recoil. He seized a young man, scarcely out of his teens, cowering near the teller windows, and shoved him roughly forward. "Tell them they have 5 minutes to clear an escape route for a chopper. Pilot and full tank. Or else, pretty boy catches a bullet." Viper jammed the gun's muzzle against the hostage's temple. Sarah gasped. She couldn't see the young man's features, but she could envision the terror blooming in his eyes. A wave of nausea churned within her, a bitter cocktail of fear and powerlessness. She had to act. Somehow. Captain Miller's jaw tightened as the message was relayed. The image of the petrified hostage sent a shiver of apprehension through him. He loathed these standoffs. Each second was a precarious gamble, a dance with the devil. Himself. He suspected Viper was bluffing, at least momentarily. But what were his limits? "Tell them we require proof of life," Miller commanded, his voice taut. "And buy us time. Get SWAT positioned on the rooftop and sharpshooters on the adjacent structures." Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating with apprehension. Viper stalked back and forth, his gaze flicking between the captives and the entrance. Glitch, surprisingly composed, tinkered with his laptop, a slender cable snaking toward the bank's security mainframe. "They want proof?" Viper snarled, shoving the young man closer to the glass. "Show them you're still kicking." The young man, face ashen and tear-streaked, gave a feeble nod. He lifted a trembling hand in a weak signal towards the officers outside. Sarah watched, her mind whirling. The silent alarm had worked, but to what avail? They were trapped, and Viper was ratcheting up the tension. She stole a glance at the elderly woman beside her. The rhythmic clicking of rosary beads a quiet counterpoint to the chaos. "Time!" Viper bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. He increased the pressure of the gun against the young man's head. "So, they want to play hardball. Fine. How about this?" He fired. The report echoed brutally in the confined space. Sarah screamed, flinching instinctively. The young man slumped to the floor, a blossoming crimson stain spreading across his shirt. Silence descended, thick and stifling, broken only by muffled sobs that Sarah's ears rang. The enormity of the event was slow to register. The stark reality slammed into her. This wasn't just a robbery gone awry. It was a visceral struggle for survival. Outside, Captain Miller swore under his breath. A low, venomous sound. He'd hoped to avert this, to broker a bloodless resolution. Now, the stakes were irrevocably higher. Swift, decisive action was imperative. "Snipers, do you have visual confirmation?" He barked into his comms. "Negative, Captain," came the response. Line of sight obscured. Frustration surged through Miller. He needed eyes on Viper. A clear shot. Time was slipping away. Every tick of the clock increased the likelihood of further casualties. He drew another steadying breath. Forcing composure, he had to trust his gut, rely on his team. Inside, Viper's eyes darted wildly, his face flushed with desperation. He was losing his grip. He gestured frantically toward Glitch. "Take the security feeds offline. Now." Glitch, fingers dancing across the keyboard, nodded curtly. "Done. They're blind." Viper spun back toward the hostages, his gaze sweeping over their terrified visages. He leveled the gun at Sarah. "You," he said, his voice a low, chilling rasp. "You're going to deliver a message. Tell them exactly what I want. No funny business. Or you're next in line." A quiet day interrupted. Dawn painted the Double N Ranch in strokes of rose and ochre, the fields shimmering with early dew. A zephyr whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying a woodsy perfume of sun-baked earth and wild sage. Chuck Norris, denim-clad and comfortably worn, stood at the property line, observing a band of Mustangs at their morning graze. Only the faint complaint of the fence's weathered wood and the distant trill of a meadowlark punctuated the quiet. He savored a draw from his scarred mug, the potent black brew chasing away the morning chill. This spread was his refuge, a place where the world's clamor dissolved into the natural symphony of the plains. He'd built it over years, a testament to grit, independence, and reverence for the land. It was more than just acreage. It was his creed made manifest. Boot heels crunching on the gravel path, he headed toward the barn. Inside, the mingled scents of cured hay and saddle leather hung in the air. He stroked the sleek coat of justice, his Appaloosa, the horse responding with a soft, reassuring nudge. Grooming the animal became a quiet ritual, a meditative connection. The shrill wail of a distant siren shattered the idyll. A frown creased his brow. Such sounds were uncommon here, where stray cattle or the occasional hapless tourist usually constituted excitement. He dismissed it, assuming some speeder on the nearby highway. Drawn by the inviting fragrance of blueberry pancakes, he ambled toward the house. Inside, Gina hummed a light-hearted melody as she tended the griddle. It was a tableau of domestic serenity, sharply contrasted against the turbulence beyond their borders. He settled at the kitchen table. The familiar checkered cloth a small comfort. A stack of steaming pancakes, glistening with syrup, appeared before him. Fork in hand, he froze as a news flash erupted on the wall-mounted television. Hostage crisis unfolding at the First National Bank in downtown Dallas. Authorities confirmed that an armed group, led by an individual known only as Viper, are holding several people against their will. The image seared itself into his mind. The bank, its facade violated by shattered glass and police barricades. The reporter's urgent cadence painted a bleak picture, spiraling tensions. The police chief's desperate appeal, and the chilling news that a hostage had already been wounded. His jaw clenched as the story unfolded. This cold-blooded disregard for life, This raw savagery offended his core values. He'd stared into the abyss enough times to know when diplomacy reached its limits. Gina's gentle touch grounded him. "Chuck, what is it, honey?" He shook his head, transfixed. The reporter was now interviewing a bystander, her voice a tremulous thread. "They're preying on innocent people, Gina," he said, his tone a low rumble. "Holding them prisoner. Putting them in mortal danger." The pancake suddenly held no appeal. The tranquility of the ranch seemed leagues away as he pushed the plate aside and rose, the chair legs squealing against the floor. "I have to go," he stated, resolution hardening his voice. Concern clouded Gina's gaze. "Chuck, please be careful." He nodded, a glint of steel in his eyes. "Always am." Leaving the kitchen, he walked to the garage, bypassing his newer truck to the rear. Shrouded beneath a tarp, sat a more discreet machine. He peeled back the canvas, revealing a black Dodge Ram pickup, its robust tires promising uncompromising performance. This situation called for decisive action. A response unburdened by protocols, he slid into the driver's seat, the engine's growl a low, guttural promise. The rearview mirror reflected his own determined gaze. He tugged his cowboy hat lower, gesture as familiar as breathing, shifting into gear. He reversed out of the drive, tires spitting pebbles. The Double N Ranch dwindled behind him, the peaceful morning now a faded echo. The highway unspooled toward Dallas, a path fueled by purpose and quiet resolve that he knew what had to be done. Viper had to be stopped. Innocence had to be shielded. Justice needed to be delivered, one swift blow at a time. The legend arrives. The black Dodge Ram, its engine a guttural promise of retribution, sat idling at the police barricade's edge. Chuck Norris emerged. The car doors slammed, punctuating the tense air like a judge's final decree. Dressed in unassuming attired jeans, a navy shirt, and weathered boots, he offered no grand entrance, no theatrical display. He simply was. A ripple of surprised silence spread through the assembled officers. Radios buzzed with hushed voices. Even the ravenous news crews, usually jockeying for position, stood transfixed, their lenses trained on the man who had materialized, Captain Robert Miller. His face a topographical map of worry lines carved by the escalating crisis, elbowed his way through the blue wall of uniforms. He smoothed his impeccably pressed shirt, a subconscious attempt to regain control in the face of the overwhelming. Miller had navigated armed robberies, even a few dicey standoffs, but this felt seismic. This was Chuck Norris. "Mr. Norris," Miller began, his voice a strained blend of deference and trepidation. "With all due respect, this is an active crime scene. We believe we have the situation contained." Norris's gaze, the hue of gunmetal, locked onto Miller's. It wasn't overtly hostile, yet carried a weight that made the captain feel dissected, analyzed. "Contained." Norris's voice resonated, a low rasp akin to granite grinding against granite. "I caught the news report, Captain. Containment typically doesn't involve human shields." Miller's Adam's apple bobbed that he understood he was outgunned, not in weaponry, but by sheer, undeniable force of presence. "We have negotiators engaged. Standard procedure." A subtle tilt of Norris's head, a nearly imperceptible gesture, spoke volumes of skepticism. "Procedure. Of course. And how is that benefiting those trapped inside?" He didn't pause for a reply, his focus shifting to the First National Bank. The building loomed, a silent monolith of concrete and glass imprisoning an unknown number of souls. Within, Sarah Jenkins, a bank teller with a defiant crimson streak woven into her otherwise unassuming brown hair, huddled behind the counter with two colleagues. The quiet was shattered only by the occasional bellowed command from Viper, their captor, and the stifled weeping of a young woman near the entrance, her heart hammered, a trapped bird desperate for escape. She chanced to peek through a crack in the bulletproof glass. The street swam with flashing lights and figures in uniform. Then she spotted him, even at this distance, The iconic silhouette was unmistakable. Chuck Norris. A quick inhale escaped her. "What is it?" whispered Maria, a young teller teetering on the edge of collapse. "It's him," Sarah whispered back, voice trembling. "Chuck Norris is here." A spark of hope flickered in Maria's eyes, immediately followed by disbelief. "Chuck Norris? Here? Now? That's impossible." Yet Sarah knew what she'd witnessed. Somehow, his presence there, a silent guardian, gifted her a shard of courage she'd thought lost. Inside the vault, Viper, a man whose ambition far surpassed his acumen, prowled like a restless tiger. Initially, he'd relished the chaos, the power, the fear radiating from his hostages like a potent stimulant. But now, a knot of anxiety twisted in his gut. He'd seen the news clips, the shaky footage of Chuck Norris dismantling heavily armed squads with effortless grace. He dismissed them as fanciful tales, cinematic exaggerations. Until this moment, one of his men, a mountainous thug named Rocco, gave him a nudge. "Boss, see that dude outside? By the cop cars." Viper squinted through the narrow viewport of the vault door. His blood turned to ice. The man, illuminated by the pulsing red and blue lights, exuded an aura of quiet threat that sent tremors through him. "Who is that?" Viper hissed, his voice barely audible. Rocco swallowed hard, fear evident in his eyes. "That's Chuck Norris, boss." Viper scoffed, attempting to project an image of control. "Chuck Norris? What's he going to do? Spinning he'll kick the vault open? This isn't a movie." But the bravado felt flimsy, even to his own ears. That he suspected, deep down, that this wasn't merely another siege. This was different. This was Chuck Norris altering the equation. Outside, Chuck Norris surveyed the bank, his gaze sweeping across the windows, the doorways, the subtle architectural details that might present either an opening or a liability. He disregarded protocol, eschewed procedure. Results were his only focus. He was reading the terrain, measuring the risks, preparing to dispense. Justice. A palpable tension filled the air. The legend had arrived, and fate was about to be rewritten. Tick-tock. Glitch was a knot of anxiety hunched over the vault's interface. His fingers danced across the keys, a frantic ballet against the implacable steel. Perspiration slicked his brow, mirroring the taunting glow of the LED displays. The vault door, a fortress of steel and encrypted algorithms, stood defiant. Each failed attempt ratcheted up his dread. Curses, a jumbled litany of tech speak and raw frustration, escaped his lips. "Blast it! Why isn't this bypass working?" He'd rerouted power, circumvented heat sensors, even unleashed a custom-built brute force program. All futile. The vault radiated a cool, unwavering power, mocking his digital incursions. A furtive glance revealed Viper pacing. His fury, a palpable heat. Glitch knew could sear him. The walls were closing in, and the vault door remained his unyielding obstacle. Outside, Chuck Norris leaned against the police cruiser's hood, his gaze laser-focused on the bank's facade. Not merely the entrance, but asterisk. Through asterisk it, his perception dissecting the unfolding drama within. He registered Glitch's feverish activity, the dissipating waves of desperation. He deciphered the algorithms the kids struggled to implement, the key sequences, the very intention behind each keystroke. A subtle smile touched Norris's lips. The boy possessed skill, certainly, but expertise alone wasn't the key. This vault, he understood, wasn't merely shielded by code. It was guarded by resolve, and Glitch's efforts lacked that unshakable certainty. Inside, Viper's control frayed. The news reports flickering on the bank's screens, usually a wicked amusement, now felt like a countdown clock. Each tick amplified the stakes. Each delay tightened the vice. He seized Sarah, the teller who'd met his gaze with unflinching defiance, and thrust her forward like a shield. "All right, listen up." Viper's voice, a strained rasp, betrayed his fear. "This charade ends now. My associate is experiencing difficulties. To encourage him, I'll offer a demonstration. If that vault doesn't yield in 60 seconds, this woman will suffer the consequences. He jammed the pistol's muzzle against Sarah's temple. She recoiled slightly, but held his gaze. A collective intake of breath swept through the hostages. Some began to weep softly. The air thickened, heavy with fear, a suffocating presence. Sarah, despite the cold steel pressed to her skull, fought to remain composed. She drew a slow, steady breath, ignoring the metallic tang clinging to her skin. "Don't do this," she stated, her voice surprisingly even. "It doesn't need to end this way. You can still turn back." Viper's laugh was a dry, brittle thing. "Turn back? Lady, there's no turning back from this. Not anymore. Now shut your mouth and pray your friend cracks that safe." He tightened his grip on the weapon. His knuckles bleached white. Glitch, jolted by Viper's roar, whirled around. He saw Sarah, the gun, the abject terror contorting the faces of those around him. His fingers locked above the keyboard. The enormity of the situation, the weight of his failure, crashed over him. 60 seconds, an impossible demand. He was out of stratagems, out of avenues, facing a catastrophe of his own making. He swallowed hard. Forcing himself to concentrate, he had to try something. Anything. Desperately, he parsed the scrolling code, seeking a weakness, a glitch, anything to buy them time. Chuck Norris straightened, pushing off the cruiser. The air around him seemed to hum with sudden energy. He moved toward the bank. His pace purposeful, unwavering. The officers, still crouched behind cover, watched with a blend of apprehension and awe. Captain Miller knew, with a sinking feeling, that his already tenuous grip on the situation was about to dissolve. Inside, the clock relentlessly ticked down. Sarah closed her eyes, steeling herself. Viper's grip grew tighter. Glitch, in a final, desperate gamble, initiated a complete system reboot, hoping at least to scramble the security protocols and gain a few precious moments. The vault panel flickered, died. Then, silence. Viper's curse was a primal growl of fury. He cocked the pistol's hammer. "Time's up." He spat. "No time to waste." Sarah Jenkins risked a glance towards the bank's entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird through the glass. She saw the blur of flashing lights, the organized chaos she knew meant the police had arrived. But the sight brought little comfort. Viper's volatile rage was a far more immediate threat than any SWAT team. She caught a glimpse of a figure standing just beyond the police barricade, a man whose silhouette radiated an almost palpable stillness. He wasn't moving, wasn't yelling, wasn't even visibly reacting to the unfolding drama. Yet, Sarah felt an inexplicable surge of hope, a fragile spark ignited in the suffocating darkness. The man possessed a certain presence. It was absurd, she knew, to place her hopes on a stranger in a crisis, but desperation had a way of rewriting logic. Chuck Norris watched Sarah. He saw the fear etched on her face, the forced calm trembling in her posture, the glint of defiance in her eyes. He recognized the quiet courage that often bloomed in the face of overwhelming odds. The police were setting up, establishing a perimeter, following procedure. All necessary, no doubt, but agonizingly slow. Glitch's reboot gamble, as risky and chaotic as it was, meant time was slipping away, and time, in this situation, was measured in heartbeats and whispered prayers. He scanned the surrounding area, his gaze dissecting the scene with practiced precision. Captain Robert Miller, the officer in charge, looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His face was a mask of grim determination mixed with a palpable anxiety. Chuck understood the feeling. The responsibility for the lives inside rested squarely on Miller's shoulders, a heavy burden in a situation rapidly spiraling out of control. "Damn it," Miller muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We need eyes inside. Now to SWAT team, get ready on my mark." He barked orders into his radio, his voice tight with urgency. He felt the pressure mounting, the seconds ticking by like miniature explosions. The news crews were already arriving, their cameras hungry for a story, their presence adding another layer of complexity to the already fraught situation. Chuck Norris knew he couldn't wait any longer. The methodical, by-the-book approach wouldn't cut it. He needed to be inside, to assess the situation firsthand and neutralize the threat before it escalated. Further, he formulated a plan, a series of calculated movements that relied on stealth, precision, and an intimate understanding of human behavior. The first step was bypassing the police barricade. He couldn't afford a confrontation. Not yet. The element of surprise was crucial. He circled around the perimeter. Moving with a fluidity that belied his age, he found a blind spot, a narrow alleyway between two buildings that offered a sliver of cover. The alley reeked of stale garbage and damp concrete. The kind of forgotten corner where shadows thrived. He melted into the darkness, his movements silent and deliberate. He observed the two officers guarding the alley entrance, their attention focused on the bank across the street. They were young, eager, but clearly inexperienced. Their stances were tense, their eyes darting nervously. Chuck took a deep breath, focusing his energy. He moved like a whisper, a phantom gliding through the shadows. He closed the distance, his footsteps making no sound on the grimy pavement. He used the alley's narrow confines to his advantage, pressing against the wall to minimize his profile, reaching the officers. He executed a maneuver so swift and subtle it was almost imperceptible, that a pressure point strike to the neck of one, a silent takedown of the other. Both men slumped to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. He moved them deeper into the alley, out of sight from the main street. He surveyed his handiwork, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. No time to waste. He emerged from the alleyway, his gaze fixed on the bank. The glass doors seemed to beckon, a silent invitation to enter the chaos within. He took a step forward, his resolve hardening with each stride. He was ready. Justice kicks in. The vault door emitted a drawn-out metallic groan, a sound Sarah barely heard over her thundering pulse. Then, stillness. Only Mrs. Henderson's stifled weeping, the elderly woman clutching her purse like a precious totem, punctuated the heavy air. Suddenly, the quiet exploded, not with a conventional blast, but with a discordant clamor. It was the sound of tortured metal, quickly followed by a cataclysmic crack that reverberated through the chamber. The vault door, a colossal bastion of steel and reinforced concrete, warped inward, etched with a network of profound fractures. Finally, with a piercing screech that assaulted the ears, the entire barricade dissolved into a maelstrom of sparks and jagged metal shards. Silhouetted against the harsh glare of emergency lights beyond, stood Chuck Norris. He didn't simply occupy the space. He commanded it. Every hostage, every thief, every lingering whisper of hope or terror, snapped into laser focus. Sarah felt a visceral jolt, a shocking wave of disbelief rolling through her. He was tangible, present, and the impossible had become reality. Mickey, the nervous one in the ill-fitting ski mask, squeaked and backpedaled, tripping over a discarded equipment bag as he scrambled upright. His pistol trembled in his grasp. What in God's name? Even Bruiser, the hulking ringleader, appeared momentarily dumbstruck. The vice-like grip on his semi-automatic rifle loosened just a fraction. His previously glacial eyes widened, reflecting a spark of something akin to wonder. Absurd, yet, whatever flicker ignited within him offered Sarah a fragile shard of optimism. Perhaps they wouldn't all perish within this sterile, fluorescent-lit tomb. Norris remained silent. Words were superfluous. His very presence made a declaration. Dark, unwavering eyes traversed the scene, dissecting the tableau with unsettling swiftness. His gaze paused on Sarah, a fleeting, unreadable expression flitting across his features before continuing its assessment. Then, Bruiser roared, a guttural expulsion of sound. It was a primal challenge, a desperate gamble to seize control from a situation hurtling beyond his grasp. "Take him down!" he bellowed, shoving Mickey aside. "Do it now!" Mickey, galvanized by Bruiser's fury, hefted his pistol. But before his finger could caress the trigger, Norris became a blur. The eye struggled to follow the swift, liquid motion as a hand lashed out. Abruptly, Mickey was airborne, arcing across the room like a discarded mannequin, impacting a pile of deposit slips with a sickening crunch. Bruiser didn't hesitate as he charged, a human juggernaut fueled by fury and desperation. He swung the rifle like a bludgeon, aiming for Norris's skull. Sarah gasped, the sound swallowed by the sudden eruption of carnage. She squeezed her eyes shut, anticipating the worst, but instead of devastation, a sound like amplified thunder ripped through the air at a horrifying crunch of bone grinding against bone. Then, silence. She risked a peek. Bruiser hung suspended, frozen mid-charge. His eyes bulged in their sockets. His face a grotesque caricature of agony. One of Norris's legs was extended, the heel of his boot firmly embedded in Bruiser's sternum. It wasn't merely a kick. It was an epitaph. A promise of suffering yet to come. Then, Norris retracted his leg. Bruiser, released from this impossible stasis, collapsed into a crumpled heap. He lay motionless. The remaining robbers, paralyzed by shock, stood transfixed, their tough facades vaporizing like morning dew. Even the hostages, huddled together in terror, appeared to have stopped breathing, held captive by the sheer, brutal efficiency of the display. Norris surveyed the scene, his face an unreadable mask. He hadn't broken a sweat, his clothes remained unruffled. He might have simply been requesting a coffee refill. He advanced, his boots crunching on the shattered remains of the vault door. Next, he rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly tremor that resonated through the room. Sarah observed the naked fear etched onto the robbers' faces. They were no longer dominating. They were vulnerable, and Chuck Norris was the apex predator. One of the robbers, a gaunt youth with acne-scarred cheeks and trembling limbs, dropped his weapon with a clang. He elevated his hands in surrender. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." Another mimicked the action, then another. Within moments, the remaining robbers lay disarmed, their weapons scattered like unwanted toys. They knelt, heads bowed, awaiting judgment. The ensuing silence was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the shallow breaths of the hostages and an occasional sob. Sarah felt a bewildering mix of relief and sheer disbelief that it had ended, just like that. Ended because Chuck Norris had kicked down a bank vault. The notion bordered on comical, yet it was incontrovertibly, undeniably the truth. But even as the wave of relief subsided, a new tide of apprehension began to swell. What came next? The police were positioned outside, barricading the street, totally ignorant of the theater unfolding within, and Chuck Norris remained an enigma, a force of nature, unpredictable in its power. Sarah watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. He moved with quiet resolve, his gaze locked on the kneeling figures. What would his actions be? Would he simply surrender them to the authorities? Or would he? She shuddered, the future a canvas of uncertainty. One thing was certain. The situation remained unresolved. The arrival of Chuck Norris hadn't delivered them salvation. It had merely altered the equation, and Sarah sensed that the true chaos was only beginning. One by one, Bruiser, living up to his moniker, stampeded forward, a titan of muscle propelled by desperation. His bellow echoing like a tormented beast, the air shimmered with his rabid energy. A stark contrast to the unnerving tranquility emanating from Chuck Norris. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, steeling herself for the impending clash. When she risked a peek, Bruiser was already pirouetting through the air, not in triumph, but in helpless disarray. Norris hadn't stirred, seemingly. A heartbeat before, Bruiser was a raging torrent. The next, his assault had been hijacked, contorted against him in a lightning-fast maneuver. A pained expulsion of air escaped Bruiser as he cartwheeled awkwardly, impacting the floor with a jarring thud that reverberated through the room. He struggled to rise, but his left arm betrayed him, collapsing beneath his weight. "Ribs compromised," Norris declared, his tone utterly neutral. "Shoulder dislocated, likely a concussion." He delivered the assessment with the disinterest of reading a weather report. Bruiser, now groggy and whimpering, cradled his injured limb. His previous fury supplanted by creeping dread, he stared at Norris as if seeing him anew. The invincibility he'd projected moments ago entirely extinguished. Sarah could practically taste his primal fear, which left Glitch, the tech whiz, previously fiddling nervously with his wrist console, froze. His gaze darted frantically between Bruiser's broken form and Norris, his face a canvas of panicked calculations. Suddenly, the futility of brute force seemed to dawn on him. A spark of inspiration flickered across his features. "Okay. Hold up. Hold up," Glitch stammered, hands raised in surrender. "Let's negotiate, and I'm sure we can reach some understanding." Norris offered no verbal response, only a slight inclination of his head, a silent invitation to elaborate. Glitch swallowed hard, the bob in his throat visible. "I control this building's architecture. Security, cameras, locks, alarms, everything. I can seal this place up tighter than a drummed no entry. No exit, including certain individuals." He flicked a nervous glance at Norris. "We all walk away. Cleaned, everyone's happy. Just say the word." A shiver traced its way down Sarah's spine. He was dangling a proposition before Norris. A chance to disappear without a trace. A tempting prospect, especially for a man who likely cherished his anonymity. Glitch tapped furiously on his wrist-mounted device. A schematic of the bank materialized as a holographic projection. He gestured at it with a shaky hand. "See? I can reroute power, knock out the backup generators. Turn this place into a mausoleum and no evidence left." Norris closed the distance between them, his gaze unflinching. The air thrummed with an unspoken power that raised gooseflesh on Sarah's arms. Glitch, despite his forced bravado, trembled visibly. He was clearly in over his head, desperately clutching at the remnants of his authority. "The sole arrangement," Norris's voice rumbled, like shale shifting in an avalanche, "is justice." Glitch's face contorted into a sneer. "Justice? You think you're some kind of righteous deliverer? This isn't a screenplay, fossil. This is reality." He hammered at his device once more. "Fine. You want a piece of this? How about a little lockdown in a vault with no air?" He unleashed a torrent of code, his fingers a blur across the miniature keyboard that a low whine permeated the air, and the lights flickered erratically. Panic constricted Sarah's chest. Was he actually going to imprison them all? Then, with preternatural speed, Norris acted that IT wasn't a punch, nor a kick. That IT was something infinitely more subtle. Focused, he reached out, his fingers finding a precise point just below Glitch's ear. One single, perfectly measured application of pressure. Glitch's eyes widened in astonishment. His fingers spasmed on the device, the holographic image dissolving into nothingness. He gasped, struggling to draw breath. His knees gave way, and he crumpled to the floor, utterly inert. Sarah gaped, speechless. There had been no struggle, no visible trauma, just a touch, and Glitch was neutralized. "Pressure point," Norris explained, as if plucking the thought directly from her mind, "temporarily disrupts neural impulses. He'll be incapacitated for a time." He turned his focus to the remaining thugs, clustered together near the teller windows, their faces bleached with terror. They avoided his gaze like a curse. "You," Norris commanded, pointing to one of the men. "Dial the police, request an ambulance, and tell them Chuck Norris is the respondent." The robber, a scrawny youth with lank, oily hair, fumbled for his phone. His hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He struggled with the keypad, his eyes darting between Norris and his fallen comrades. The ensuing quiet was thick and oppressive, punctuated only by the robber's shallow breaths and the low drone of the bank's emergency lights. Sarah felt a discordant blend of relief and apprehension. The immediate danger had been extinguished, dispatched with merciless efficiency. Yet, an unsettling sensation lingered, a nagging premonition that this was far from resolved. Chuck Norris had entered the fray, and in his wake, a new breed of chaos had been unleashed. The world outside was poised for a seismic shift. The final stand. Viper's features twisted into a grotesque mask of fury, a stark contrast to Glitch sprawled nearby. His body a broken jigsaw of limbs. Bruiser, huddled near the tellers, emitted choked sobs, cradling a mangled arm, and barring the exit stood Chuck Norris. Viper spat, the globule landing with a wet slap on the polished floor, the sound magnified in the sudden hush. It's not finished. His gaze swept the room, snagging on Sarah, positioned against the wall. Her face was drained, but her eyes blazed with unexpected resolve. He surged forward, his grip on her arm like a vice. A stifled cry escaped her lips, lost in the bank's cavernous space. He hauled her in front of him, the gun's cold muzzle digging into her temple. "All right, Norris," Viper rasped, desperation lacing his tone. "Enough. You want to be a hero? Fine. But one wrong move, and Blondie gets some impromptu cosmetic surgery." Sarah's breath caught, the reek of gun oil flooded her senses, fixing her gaze on a spot beyond Viper's shoulder. She fought to steady her runaway pulse. Fear threatened to engulf her. Yet a core of defiance flickered that he wouldn't witness her crumble. She would deny him that victory. Norris remained a statue, his expression inscrutable. The silence thickened, pressing down like a shroud. Sarah registered the tremor in Viper's hand, the clammy sheen on his skin. He was terrified, and in that vulnerability, she glimpsed a sliver of hope. Finally, Norris's voice resonated, a low, guttural hum that seemed to emanate from the building's very foundation. "Viper," he stated, each word clipped and precise. "You've selected the wrong person to take hostage in a firefight." Sarah frowned. What did that signify? Was it a threat cloaked in bravado? A ludicrous, film script cliché? Before the meaning could coalesce, Norris acted. Not a run, not a leap, but a kind of quantum shift, as if reality itself momentarily skipped a frame where he stood. One instant, Viper was spewing threats. The next, he was howling in agony. The sequence blurred into a whirlwind of motion. Norris's hand, a blur of speed, impacted Viper's wrist. Sarah felt a tremor as the pressure evaporated from her temple. The weapon skittered across the floor. But the sheer force of Norris's move continued its trajectory, surging up Viper's arm, detonating against his shoulder, ultimately unbalancing him entirely. Viper staggered backward, clutching his wrist. His face a canvas of torment, he slammed into a marble pillar, slumping to the floor in a defeated heap. The pistol spun idly a few feet away, an inert symbol of his failure. Sarah remained rooted to the spot, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The world swam slightly. One moment, death stared her down the barrel. The next, she was breathing free. Norris advanced, his gaze locked on Viper. He retrieved the discarded pistol, examining it with detached objectivity. Then, with a casual flick, he sent it arcing onto the counter, where it landed with a muffled clatter. Turning to Sarah, his eyes flickered with something. Concern? Sympathy? It vanished so quickly she questioned its existence. "Are you all right?" he inquired, his voice a shade softer, bordering on gentle. Sarah gulped, struggling to find her voice. I think so," she managed, her voice trembling. "Thank you." Norris offered a curt nod, his focus already shifting to the downed robbers. The rising whine of police sirens sliced through the air. Growing inexorably louder, he surveyed the aftermath of his brutal intervention. 3 men. Neutralized. 1 woman. Shaken but intact. Justice of a brutal variety. Served. But Sarah couldn't escape the premonition that this was far from over. That the storm he ignited was just beginning to gather force. The wail of sirens, the strobing lights, felt like a macabre performance, directed by the enigmatic figure who stood center stage. Chuck Norris had preserved her, but he also ushered in a chaotic element, simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. What came next? What kind of universe did he exist in, where violence served as the language and justice was meted out with a flying kick? She had no answers, and that realization chilled her more than the cold steel against her skin. A legend retold. The sirens climbed in pitch until the bank's plate glass trembled under the assault. Robert Miller, captain, a mosaic of wrinkles carved by years of policing the city's underbelly, spat clipped commands into his radio. "SWAT, Breach. Medics. Ready. Perimeter secure. His team moved with clockwork efficiency, a sharp counterpoint to the pandemonium blooming inside at a bank heist involving Chuck Norris. The thought felt absurd. Black-clad figures swarmed through the gaping doorway, weapons tracking. Sarah, still reeling, saw them overwhelm the remaining robbers, who, demoralized by Norris's actions, surrendered with barely a whimper. The snap of handcuffs, the drone of Miranda rights, and the shuffling of defeated feet filled the air. The coppery sting of blood and the acrid bite of gunpowder began to dissipate, replaced by the brisk, medicinal scent of antiseptic as paramedics flooded the scene. Miller shouldered his way through the throng of uniforms, his gaze sweeping the interior. He found Sarah slumped against a teller station, a medic dabbing at a shallow cut on her arm. He knelt beside her, his voice softer than usual. "Miss, are you hurt badly? Can you tell me what occurred?" Her eyes, wide and unfocused, met his. He moved like lightning," she whispered, her voice thin. "Viper had a gun to my head. And then, he was down. Just down." Miller's brow furrowed. You mean Chuck Norris neutralized the threat?" A fragile smile touched Sarah's lips. "He rescued us. All of us owe him." Miller exhaled, raking a weary hand through his thinning hair. The paperwork alone threatened to bury him alive. "All right. Mississippi protocol dictates we get you checked out at the hospital." As the paramedics assisted Sarah to her feet, she scanned the bank, a subconscious search for the impossible figure. He'd vanished, gone without a trace. Had she imagined him? A cinematic savior materialized from thin air? Outside, the scene was a media circus. Cameras flashed, vying for the best angle on the aftermath. Bright yellow tape strangled the perimeter, holding back a swelling tide of onlookers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. "Did you see him in action?" A girl gasped to her friend. "He took those thugs down like they were toddlers." "Chuck Norris!" a man roared, punching the air. "Absolute legend." Miller surveyed the gathering, his expression unreadable. He recognized the genesis of a legend, a fireside tale to be spun and embellished for years to come. The Chuck Norris bank incident. Catchy, sure, but a logistical nightmare for the department. Lieutenant Davis approached, his face etched with bewilderment. "Captain," he began. "Banks secure, robbers apprehended. But Norris is gone." Poof. Vanished. Miller merely nodded. "Of course he is. But where? How did he slip away unnoticed?" Davis sputtered, incredulous. Miller shrugged. "Does it truly matter? He's Chuck Norris. He probably just phased through a wall." Davis gaped, uncertain whether he was being mocked. Miller simply sighed. Blinking against the sudden glare, the hostages emerged, one by one, into the sunlight. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a wave of relief washing over them. Many trembled, but a palpable sense of gratitude hung in the air. They had faced oblivion and survived, courtesy of Chuck Norris. Sarah, her arm supported by a sling, paused on the steps, inhaling a deep breath. The crowd surged forward, offering support and concern. "Are you okay, dear?" a woman asked, her voice laced with worry. Sarah offered a weak smile. "I will be. Thanks to him." "A true hero," someone yelled. "A legend in his own time?" Another echoed. Sarah tilted her head back, a lone tear tracing a path down her cheek. He was more than a hero or a legend. He was an elemental force, a reminder that even in the grimmest hours, the improbable could become reality. As twilight painted long shadows across the cityscape, the crowd gradually dispersed. Police continued their painstaking investigation, gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. But the narrative of the Chuck Norris bank heist had already taken flight, spreading rapidly through the city and far beyond. It was a story woven from courage, hope, and the utterly unexpected, and it was a story destined for countless retellings, wrapped in a Red Cross blanket. Sarah watched as the final patrol car departed, leaving the bank silent and hollow, a somber monument to the day's events. Yet, even in the quiet, she could still sense his lingering presence, a potent, almost mythical energy that permeated the very air. She knew this day would forever be etched into her memory, irrevocably altering the course of her life. Chuck Norris had saved her, undeniably, but he had also unleashed something unfamiliar. Unsettling feelings stirred inside her. It was something she couldn't fully grasp, something potentially volatile and beyond her control. All she could do was hope she was ready for what came next.